First reading skill in balance sheet. So what is the first reading skill we have to develop in reading the balance sheet is understanding the long-term stability of the business. So by looking at the balance sheet, we should be able to understand whether this business unit has a long-term stability. For that, let us go to a balance sheet. See, we know the balance sheet will have first the equity and liability, that is basically the liabilities. Here we'll have the shareholders funds, which is a direct contribution, reserves and surplus, which is an indirect contribution, and there will also be outsiders funds, which can be basically bankers funds and creditors funds. Now understand, the shareholders funds and reserves and surplus are called owners funds, whereas bankers funds and creditors funds are called outsiders funds. Now to understand this long-term stability, we'll take an example by dividing this into three scenarios. We'll do that. So we are going to have only the liability side of the balance sheet, where we'll list out the equity and liability. So we'll have case 1, case 2 and case 3. So I'm going to give you the information about the shareholders funds. Here the shareholder funds is 100, which is a direct contribution, and reserves and surplus is 100, which is an indirect contribution. So we have the total shareholder funds is 200, and outsider funds, the banker funds are 100 and creditors funds are 100. So the total is 200. So here you have a total liability of 400. How is it? 200 of shareholders funds and 200 of outsiders funds. Now we have to understand the long-term stability of the business. Now by looking at this, is it possible for us to understand that? Yes. Come to this point, we have shareholder funds and reserves and surplus. So these two is 200, right? This 200 is out of this 400, right? Yeah, 200 out of 400. So the shareholder funds constitutes how much? 50% of total funds. So the shareholder funds are 50% of total funds, whereas the outsider funds is also 200 on 400, which is 50% on 400. So here you can understand that owners and outsiders are in equal proportion. They have contributed 50-50. Now we'll take case 2. Here the shareholder funds are 100, reserves and surplus is 100. So the total shareholder funds are 200, and the banker funds are 400, creditor funds are 400, and total outside funds are 800. And now we have the total liability, which is 200 plus 800, which is 1000. So here please note, the shareholder funds are 100 plus 100, 200. So 200 on 1000 would give 20%. And whereas the outsider funds are 400 plus 400, which is 800 on 1000, which gives you 80%. So we'll analyze this also after seeing scenario 3. The shareholder funds, that is share capital, is 100, reserves and surplus is 100, so total is 200. Whereas the banker funds are 200, creditors funds 200, total outsiders funds are 400, and total liability is 600. How is it? 200 plus 400, 600. See, now this 100 plus 100 is the shareholder funds, which is 200 out of 400. So shareholder funds is basically how much? 33%. And here the outsider funds are 400 on 600, and it would give the ratio of how much? 67%. So now we have three scenarios, and now we can understand the business stability by analyzing scenario 1, 2 and 3. So we are going to analyze about the business stability. In which case the business stability is very poor? The long-term business stability, in which case is poor? Is it in scenario 1 or scenario 2 or scenario 3? It cannot be in scenario 1 because the contribution by the owner is 50% and contribution by outsiders is 50%. So even if outsiders withdraw their support, this business could continue because owners have a sizable stake. They'll be able to manage the show for quite some time. And here it is not as good as in scenario 3, it is not as good as 1. In scenario 3, the owner's contribution is 33%, whereas outsiders is 67. If they start withdrawing the support or if they start asking for the payment, they'll find little bit of difficulty, but it will not be as bad as scenario 2, because in scenario 2 the owner's contribution is only 20%, whereas outsiders contribution is 80%, and these guys are actually running the show. They have funded 80% of their requirements for the business unit and only 20% is from the owner. And if these guys suddenly withdraw the support or if they ask for the payment and if some of their payment is not honored, it is highly possible that these guys will take the company in scenario 2 for a ride for not meeting their obligation. So business stability will be very poor in scenario 2. It will be good in scenario 3, but it will be at its best in scenario 1, because here their level of contribution is high. So this is the concept of understanding the long-term stability by looking at the balance sheet, that is identifying the owner's funds and outsiders funds and identifying each person's share in the total funds. Here the owner fund is 50, outside is 50, and it undergoes various changes. So higher the owner fund, better is the long-term stability of the business.